Today, I really needed to address my deadlift form. On Sunday, I went over to my buddy Ryan's house. He is the person who inspired me to start lifting and get into this sport and lifestyle. And we decided to push our deadlifts. I posted that video on Sunday as a kind of retrospective of what happened and to kind of reiterate that I am really not happy with how things ended in the end. With my attempts to pull the 400 pounds. Going up to it, doing the 340, the 380 or 370 odd, whatever the weights were there. It moved really well. Those are weights that I'm pretty comfortable with. But trying to pull the 400, my form was awful. I had very bad positioning with my hips, and I was effectively trying to good morning that weight up. And that's not that's not a good way to do that. That's a very easy way to injure yourself going into that lift. So I decided to kind of shake things up a bit. I took conventional deadlifts out of the workout program for the time being, and I'm going to sub them out with doing deficit deadlifts, just to try to work on that positioning from the beginning. It is awkward to start. I haven't done them in a very long time. If anything, I just did them for kind of singles to screw around at one point after I built the box with leftover material after building my boxes for the block pulls. And it is going to take a little bit of getting used to, but I think it should only take a couple of weeks to really acclimate to them. And I really hope this helps. I may incorporate barbell hip thrusts just to try to strengthen that uh, entire system of my body. That I think I'm very deficient in my hip activation and the control of that, and I'm overly leg dominant. And I've got so much power in my legs at this point, and I'm still just kind of missing in the hips with pulling off of the floor. I've really built up my lockouts. I've built up the middle portion of the lift, but I leak so much power when I'm trying to start the lift that I really need to focus and address that specifically. So working in today, everything in the squats moved very well. I'm never really going to be too concerned about doing a 230-pound squat for a 5x5. It is at this point an extremely lightweight for me. And it's one that I really can just kind of do without much thought. Um, Going into it with the warm ups, I did a set of five at open, or a set of 10 at open bar, set of five at 95, 135, and 185, just to kind of get blood flowing in my legs. Going into the 5 sets of five, I focus on making sure that I was hitting my depth, that I wasn't cheating on my lockouts, and that I was really making sure to engage my glutes on the way up. Because again, my quads are so large in comparison to my hamstrings and so strong that I think I'm using that to kind of just cheat the weight up at times. So I really want to make sure I'm getting this correctly, not even just in my deadlifts, but in my squats. Bench press, much the same with the squats, 150 pounds, not very heavy for me, but it's still a weight I'm working with right now to kind of work up to the final goal of 170 in this cycle. Um, it moved really well. I'm getting a lot better at making sure to maintain the tension in my shoulders whenever I'm starting my reps. So pulling my shoulders together and getting them down, my shoulder blades together, shoulder blades down, uh, for that rep. It's something that I historically was really bad with, and I feel like I've really improved that over the last few months. And I'm very happy with how that's going. So now the key is just maintaining that as I go up in weight. Something else that I think I may need to incorporate from time to time is training singles. I really rarely ever train single, like heavy singles. I can rep out a working set of five with no issue at almost whatever weight that I'm choosing for that particular day, as long as it's within reason. But doing a heavy single is something that I always kind of reserve for, once every month and a half, 2 months, 3 months that I'm just going to do, and I don't practice it. So it's something that I need to find a way to incorporate into my days. And honestly, just picking one group of a lift like every 2 or 3 weeks and then doing that for heavy singles seems to work well. It's not a super high frequency, but it's enough to kind of keep the idea in your mind that you got to prepare to do one heavy lift at this weight. As right now, I'm just trying to build up overall strength rather than doing, a specific weight with technique, to try to max out with consistently. And there are some weights that I can do that with that I've built up with, like in deadlifts. I've gotten more and more comfortable in the high 300s. In squats, I can comfortably do, high 200s. I imagine probably low 300s now. And in bench, I can comfortably bench 170 to 180 for a single, but I don't do it often enough. And that's something I really may have to change going forward and thinking about this with how things really kind of went on Saturday. Um, this isn't one of those like, oh, I need to radically reshape everything in my training program. It's just I need to take in consideration more things that I'm doing and how I should approach this. Because if I want to be able to pull 500 pounds, I need to be able to do heavy singles. And I really haven't programmed that for quite some time. So going into these deficit deadlifts, my deficit deadlift box is about 4 inches, so it's a little high for some, um, and it's going to take some getting used to. One of the things that trying to force myself into is that deeper starting position, and getting my body used to this is going to be key, so that way I'm not doing a good morning in this weight. The first set, little awkward. I warmed up by doing a set of 10 at 135 and then a set of 8 at 185 just to kind of get a feeling for that motion. And one thing that I noticed when I was doing my warm ups is that I had a lot of friction between my inner forearms and my elbows against my uh, edges of my shorts and around my hips. And I gave myself like rug burn from it. So have to reconsider the grip positioning as I was doing that just to make sure that I wasn't, hurting myself with this. Also, did not use chalk like I normally do during like my deadlift single or 5x5 because I'm doing these at 225 rather than what would have been 280 today. Um, just to acclimate to the weight, I dropped things down to like 80%. I know that an ideal range for these is somewhere between 70 to 90, depending on what you're good working with. So looking at these right now, my back's a little rounded, and I noticed that at times I was going through and really straightening things out. But you can see I still have this tendency to try to enter this good morning posture with these lifts, and I'm really really trying to fight that. And granted, this is the first time I've done this in a working set, for a workout. So it's going to take time to get used to the movement and be able to accomplish that properly. I really like that first rep right there. And these are looking a little better as I'm getting more into it. Um, but I need to make sure that I'm engaging my hips a little bit earlier because that's still going to be a little late in my opinion, but I am getting that weight up. So by the fifth set, I felt fairly comfortable with it, but there's still, time to go. I think I'm going to do this for the rest of this session, or the rest of the cycle for 2 more weeks and kind of see how I feel and maybe do it for another 4 weeks after this cycle, just to kind of feel it. This in this fifth set, I was really making sure to drive myself down and get that feeling in these reps to try to make sure that I was getting that full extension necessary for the deficits in this. Like right there, I really like that setup in that final rep. That final one of the whole workout, I finished it and I felt as I was walking back that was correct. And looking back on it, it looks really good. Um, and so if I can replicate that feeling of that rep and be able to apply that to the future sets going next week and the week thereafter, and even just my regular conventional deadlifts, that feeling and that way that I did that rep is how I need to start doing my deadlifts to be able to do this more effectively. And I can cheat my lifts at lower weights because I have so much power in my legs that I can just rocket that weight up, but it's not going to fly at the heavier weights. And doing that is going to really increase the chance of me hurting myself by either pulling the weight up and then trying to do a good morning on that and putting all that pressure on my lower back. And that's one thing that talking to another friend of mine had mentioned, that I probably have really strong lower back muscles because of that tendency when I deadlift. And truth be told, they're pretty well developed compared to everything else on my back as a result. So he was very good in being able to pick that out and make that assumption, and he was dead on. So I really need to watch this and make sure that I'm doing this properly so that I can properly engage the posterior chain to do these deadlifts with correctly. I need to engage at the same time with my legs. I need to get the slack out of the bar first while low enough to be able to pull the weight. Um, One thing that thought that crossed my mind while I was doing these two, that's something that I might pursue after doing these deficit deadlifts, is look into getting back into practicing some Olympic lifts, because those require you to have a low starting position to be able to get into position for that, for a clean and jerk or for a snatch. Because if you're high up, you're not going to have the leverage necessary to do that lift. So it's a thought. It's one that may work. I'm not very practiced in those lifts anymore. I was not the best when I was doing them just kind of for fun and screwing around because I wanted to figure those out. But that might be something to look into doing in addition to the deficit deadlifts, just to change things up and really kind of reinforce that positioning with my hips so I can get as much power as possible without leaking. Something I'm going to have to think about, and I'm just going to have to put it into practice and see what happens.